is the wonderful tale that we're about to hear about these four remarkable individuals. Now, Johnson himself living here with a huge array of people, the lives of which are fascinating. And he himself has many, many biographies written about him, but you may or may not know that he himself wrote about 55 biographies as well as the dictionary and a multitude of other things. He was really fascinated in the lives of others, basically. And he fundamentally believed that biography was actually the greatest species of writing. And that's because you could learn so much about the lives of others, which could be of interest, but also instruction. You can learn more about ourselves, both as individuals, by drawing from their lives and their challenges, their obstacles, their triumphs in the face of adversity, but also at a societal level as well, both the period in which these lives took place, but the period in which we live today. He said biography of the various kinds of narrative of writing is the most eagerly read and the most easily applied to the purpose of life. And we are joined here by Angela Morgan, herself a blue badge tourist guide who's spoken here on a number of occasions in the past and will continue to have a very good relationship with us, we're very excited about, who's an expert in London history, but particularly in the lives of black people in the 18th century and beyond. So if you'd like to hear anything more about the whirlwind tour we're about to hear about the lives of four remarkable people, please do get in touch with us, we're in touch with her as well, so you can find out more and perhaps join her on a talk. So without further ado, if you'd like to join me in welcoming her.
Thank you for calling an expert. And it's really a guy just enjoying history and just being able to share it with others. But thank you very much for coming. It's going to be a whirlwind. I've written so much down to prepare for this, and I'm trying to filter it out, and I'm trying to do as much of giving you the essence of the people that I'm going to speak of today. And I made the title, I was sitting down thinking, what should be the title? And I thought, well, reading, writing, and fencing, because one of the characters or the personages I'm going to talk about was taught to fence. I thought, why not? And include him as well. But again, I put in in inverted commas, dangerous, because again, we're looking at the 18th century. It's the time in which there was still slavery, and it's important to understand that these individuals were in a way navigating that time, and equally, were at the whim of others in terms of their success or their failures. But I want to be sort of keeping on time with you, as well as so that those of you who have to be somewhere else don't feel that they've been cheated out of anything that I'm going to say. But the introduction very much is about a selection of African people who were enslaved, servants or free people who lived and worked or visited London during the mid-18th century. And as part of doing all this research, I wanted to know what life was like for them, and as they navigated the whims of the general populace, because they were there, but didn't necessarily mean that they would be accepted. So I welcome you to this presentation about four interesting people who lived in the 18th century. Their stories will give you an insight into the world they lived in and how they navigated it with the omnipresent spectre of slavery. A world in which people of African descent were generally expected to be enslaved, subhuman, lacking the intellectual capacity for such high-order pursuits as reading, creative writing, and mathematics, and even fencing. Doubts also persisted about the views they expressed that countered those of supposed superior beings. Whilst researching their stories, I've grown fond of them, but equally cynical about how they were embraced or encouraged to show off their skills or their views that they expressed. I felt like they were expected to perform for the pleasure and acceptance of people who could turn on them if a simple word or gesture was seen as unacceptable. To some degree, know thy place. So let me introduce you to them now, just in this little piece here, just to say we're going to be talking about Phyliss Wheatley, a poetess, that's how she was referred to, in a time that I put in poet. Ignatius Sancho, I'm sure many of you have heard of Ignatius, he's the most famous of all four. Julius Soubise, all right, he's there, as a macaroni, wanting to do his spaghetti, and a fencer. And we have Jane Harry-Thresher. Again, her story is an amazing story, an artist, an abolitionist campaigner as well. And I've come to discover that I like them very much and I get a sense of who they were. But I want to start now with the first being Phyliss Wheatley. And what you see is the phrase that was said in a time when she went into a sort of circle where she was sort of reading her poetry, and the Countess cried out, "Oh, sable muse." And she wrote this in a letter to her friend in America called Arbor Tanner, who was also an enslaved young woman. And they kept up this correspondence. And so she sort of relayed it there. But you're looking at a young woman, a black woman, in a very plain dress and a sort of little bib and a hat, and she's got a quill in her hand. Do you know what a quill is, young people? Yes? And there's an inkwell beside there as well. And she's got the paper there ready to write down her thoughts in poetry, and the book beside her may well be a Bible. But the arch, if you look above her head, you will see that it says Phyliss Wheatley, Negro servant of Mr. John Wheatley of Boston. So he was promoting her through the fact that she could write poetry. So I want to say to you is, to start the introduction to her, I want to take you to 1773, and she's visiting the Tower of London. A young woman is escorted around the Tower of London by a member of the Tower staff. She's being shown the King's armoury, the animals in the Tower menagerie, the lions, leopards, and a panther. She's also shown, and possibly will be allowed to touch, the crown jewels. She's much enamoured by the golden font that was made especially for the christening of the monarch, that was King Charles, and Charles's illegitimate children. She's attracting a lot of attention, not just in the Tower of London, not because of her gender, but for her skin colour, her place of birth, and the circumstances that led to her travel to London. So that's in part of a letter that she sent to Arbor to explain what she had seen. But written like this, it just sort of gives it a much rounder feeling in terms of why she's here. And a person, again, people would have normally thought as an enslaved person, but there she was in a way a VIP. And the person who was taking her around is this gentleman here, Granville Sharp. So you may have heard of Granville Sharp. So he had earlier, the year before, 1772, had been involved in the Somerset case. And the ruling by the Chief Lord Justice Mansfield meant that any slave who was brought to England from the colonies could not be forced to return to the colony as a slave. So this opportunity of taking Phyliss around, he basically had conversations with her. And he, being a firm believer of the abolition of slavery, felt that she would be an exemplary example for the case for the freedom of black people. In his opinion, she was a revolutionary thinker, and Sharp believed that she was evidence that black people could produce their own original ideas and were therefore human. So the places, think of yourselves as tourists in London. All right, she was a tourist in London, even though she was here to get her book published, to publish a book of poems. So first one is Cox's Museum, and the spelling in this one is, as she wrote it in her letter, Cox's Museum. It's no longer around. It was in the 18th century. It was a clockmaker who did some very ornate clocks with mechanics in. And if you go to the V&A, you'll see some examples there. Westminster Abbey. How many of you have been to Westminster Abbey? A lot of people, exactly. So you imagine walking through. We have the Royal Observatory at Greenwich. All right, another amazing place. We also have the Greenwich Hospital and the park and the chapel there. So she was very much going around and seeing places. We have Sadler's Wells, and it's spelled the way that she spelt it, with 2 Ds. All right, Sadler's Wells. And we have the British Museum. And I know many people go to the British Museum. If it's not just once, they'll go many, many times because it's absolutely free. But by her being here, all right, and being able to show people that she was interested in all these things, she became a curiosity. But the people who, in a sense, she was enslaved to John Wheatley, they took her to various people and was introduced to them, and they equally, I said, would be curious to know more about what she was thinking, and equally through the poems that she was writing. So I'm going to, if I can move my finger, I'm shaking here at the moment at the front. You don't know it, but I am. Right. So I've asterisked a number of them, but I'm going to just touch on a few. The second Earl of Dartmouth, she was introduced to him, and they found common ground because both of them shared an evangelical Christian faith. So there was things to talk about. This young black woman and this elder. Selina Hastings, she is the Countess of Huntingdon, and it was through her that Phyliss Wheatley was able to come to London because Phyliss had written a poem called the Whitefield Poem about Selina's chaplain, and she was much taken by it and the quality of that poem. So she said, yes, I'll help to get her poems published. So she was able to find a publisher for her. The other person that I was interested in, only for my curiosity, was another person that she saw, and I didn't know who he was, and that was David Solander, and he's a botanist. And I'm going to quote what she put in her letter to her friend Arba, 18th of October 1773. Then to Lord Lincoln, who visited me at my own lodgings with the famous Dr. Solander, who accompanied Mr. Banks in his late expedition around the world. And Mr. Banks is Joseph Banks, and both he and Dr. David Solander, they were also advisors to Queen Charlotte. So she wanted to know about plants. They would go to Kew and meet her and discuss all of that. So again, in a very special circle. And the other is a lady called Mrs. Mary Palmer, and she's put here a poetess, an accomplished lady. And it's interesting because I didn't know this either. Lady Mary Palmer is in fact Joshua Reynolds' sister. All right, so she was based in Devon, but the interesting thing between these two women, Lady Mary Palmer wanted to write poetry, but she was discriminated against because she was a woman. Phyliss was discriminated against because she was a woman, but black. All right, so they had, again, a commonality there. But we have Benjamin Franklin, who she was also introduced to, and I'm going to read something then you can judge for yourself what he thought of her. Upon your records, this is a letter that he wrote to one of his relatives, Jonathan Williams Sr., in July 1773. Upon your recommendation, I went to see the black poetess and offered her any services I could do for her. Before I left the house, I understood her master was there and had sent her to me, but did not come into the room himself. And I thought was not pleased with my visit. I should perhaps have inquired first for him, but I've heard nothing of him, and I've heard nothing since of her. There you go. So it is what it is. But we have one that I'm going to read to you, and it's in an introduction in a way. She had an opportunity to be with a man called John Thornton. And John Thornton was an abolitionist and he was part of the Clapham sect. And I didn't know where he lived until I was reading up about it. If anybody knows Clapham, the Notre Dame estate, that's where his house and his grounds were. But he wrote to Phyliss because she'd spent a week with him and her family. And when she went back to America, he wrote to her and said, the present situation and kindness you met with from many good people and the respect that is paid to your uncommon genius. I have no reason to charge you with any indiscretions of this kind. I mean only to apprise you of the danger I feared for you when here, lest the notice many took of you should prove a snare. So in a way, it's that going into a room and thinking that everybody loves me, but they're really interested to see if you can actually read, write, and even express yourself or even think. So he was watching these people to see and make sure they did not cause her any worries, nor for her to relax and believe that she had genuine friends here. But she also had a concern. Well, they had a concern. And what we'll see, many of you can't see this, so I'll read it out for you. Since my return to America, my master has, at the desire of my friends in England, given me my freedom. So that was a letter to David Worcester. David Worcester, if you read up about him, very much involved in the War of Independence, the General Worcester. But in a way, this is people seeing a young black woman who's writing poetry, is talking and thinking in a way that they've not experienced. And the worry for her was very much whether or not she would still be accepted. But her beginning was that she was seized from Senegal and Gambia in West Africa when she was about 7 years old. she was transported to the Boston docks with a shipment of refugee slaves who were, because of their age or physical frailty, were unsuitable for rigorous labour. And there's a note here that she arrived in the month of August 1761, and she was a slender, frail female child, purchased for a trifle, because the captain of the slave ship believed that the waif was terminally ill, and he wanted to gain at least a small profit before she died. She was a slender frame and evidently suffering from a change of climate, nearly naked, with no other covering than a quantity of dirty carpet about her. So that is how she begins her life. But if you look at the poem, I'll just go to the poem. All right, you'll see it's here. It says, "It was a mercy that brought me back from a pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God and there's a Saviour too. Once I redemption neither sought or knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their colour is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train." So in a way, her history of slavery, but equally still seen as somebody that is not worthy, was recorded in this poem, and again is a poem that was accepted as part of those poems that went into the book. But that's an opening sort of message to everybody: accept us as equal. But she was bought by the Wheatleys and John Wheatley for his wife Susanna, and she was named Phyliss after the ship that she came in, and Wheatley was the family's surname. But the family themselves, they recognised that she was precocious and they encouraged her to read and write, but she did not get any wages. She was still enslaved. And if she did go out and they were showing off her talent and any money was being handed over, it wasn't for her. It would go into their estate, into their coffers. So she was basically performing and not getting any sort of relief from that. But she loved reading the Bible, and that's where in that first poem, you'll see that she, sees herself as coming from a pagan land. And she also was introduced to astronomy, geography, history, and she loved the classics, the Greek and Latin. And when they were trying to find publishers for her work in Boston, nobody was accepting it. They didn't believe that people could read and write, black people could do these things. And so they struggled to find anybody to sponsor them. And interesting enough, they went to various people to try and get them to subscribe, and they weren't interested. And one of them was a skeptic, was Thomas Jefferson. Didn't believe that she could do it. Somebody else has done it. They can't do these things. So that's why she was in London. She came to London, she spent 6 weeks here, and she met various people, and those people are recorded in letters that she wrote, and get a sense of her having a conversation, and they're very interested in what she has to say. Again, this is unique, a black person, an enslaved person, having conversations. You see on the right-hand side, you'll see that was the face of the book in terms of inside the poems on various subjects, religious and moral. So she did have a strong Christian faith. And as you can see, again, the Negro servant, but the publisher was A. Bell, and he was in Aldgate. All right, does anybody know where Aldgate is? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to show you where the bookshop was. All right, but this is the invitation from Nubian Jack and the Black History History Walks, because they were putting up a commemorative plaque that was going to be unveiled on the Dorset City Hotel. So there you have the picture of her again. So this is where it is, and that's the plaque. All right, it's a Nubian Jack plaque because it's Jack Bula has done a lot of research for many of the people that he has discovered are of African and Caribbean descent. So you can go to various places and you'll start to see these plaques, and you'll see the Nubian Jack Community Trust and whoever has sponsored it. And this time it was Black History Walks that helped with this. But we'll find another one in the moment when I go to Ignatius, and you'll see it's a different style. But again, it's Nubian Jack. And I have to say, he's done a lot in terms of getting these plaques up in places that we didn't expect to find black people. But don't worry, we are all around. But yes, so if you go down, just to say the location, if you know St. Botolph's Church, yes, down the little side alley, you'll find the plaque. So I'm going to start talking about her in a way, to finish speaking about her, so we're back to the 18th century. You're looking at the book that you have here, and I've noticed that somebody has filled in her eyes, given her some ink, and some ink in her well as well. So somebody's been doodling. But this book was put on auction. But let's go back to her in terms of what happens after she leaves from London. The book is published, and there are 16 people who are testifying that she wrote the poems. So that again reinforces the fact that this is a genuine article in terms of the book itself. And John Wheatley gave her freedom, but that was all she received from her former master. She remained in his household until 1778 when he died, but John Wheatley left her nothing in his will. She wanted to, publish a second volume of poetry, but without funds and supporters, it was never published. And that during this time, it's also a time of flux because wartime shortages. We're in a period where the independence, the War of Independence and the fallout from that. So when she left his household, she moved in to another house in Boston, and then she eventually married the person who was in the same house, a man called John Peters. And he was a free black man living in Boston. And the couple had 3 children, but 2 of them died in infancy. Phyliss and her husband, though freed, fell on hard times, and by 1784, reportedly abandoned by her husband, she was found living in a boarding house. And in that December of that year, both she and her child passed away. And a funeral was arranged by those who knew her, but she may have been buried in the area of the cemetery where her contemporaries, i.e. black people, were buried, and therefore there is no marker to know where she was buried, and they have not been able to find her remains. And she was approximately 30 years old. So this book was actually in auction, and it was called, this is the title from the website, it was called The First Edition of the First Book Publication of an African-American Woman, and the Stoddart's edition. Stoddart was a rare bookseller, and he decided to put this book on in auction, and it was bought for $38,175. I know, a lot of money. Should have loved to have had that in her time. But as I said, she died in absolute poverty. But I want to take us on. I want to move on to the next personality. As you can see, Ignatius Sancho. So we leave one life story that ended tragically and begin another that began with tragedy. So this is Ignatius Sancho. And I'm linking a little bit of Phyliss to him because he was given a copy of her book by a man called Jabez Fisher, and he read it, but he was very angry. And there's a lot, and I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to fill in the bits in terms of the summary to say that, these people who would put themselves forward to vouch for her, he said, these good, great folks all know and perhaps admired, nay, praised genius in bondage, and then, like priests and Levites in sacred writ, passed by, not one good Samaritan amongst them. And what he was saying is, it's all good and well, promoting her book, but it would be nice to have freed her. Yes, made her a free woman rather than keep her enslaved. But what you're looking at is an amazing painting of Ignatius. It was done by Thomas Gainsborough, and there's 2 stories of how this painting came about. One was that they met in Bath. He was walking along with his wife, and he met Thomas Gainsborough, and they decided that he should have a portrait of himself, or that the Duke and Duchess of Montagu, who he was working for, suggested that he has his portrait done because they had theirs done by Thomas Gainsborough. But what you're looking at is not a servant. He's very confident, yes? He's not wearing livery, i.e., the trademark of the family. He's got his own red waistcoat. He's got his hand gently in his chest, in through the waistcoat there, and there's an air very much of confidence about him. He goes, yes, I'm having my portrait taken. Very nice. All right, but this is the only portrait that we have of him, and his likeness very much has been reproduced. But if you ever get a chance to go into the Foreign Office, into their reception, you will see a modern version of him done by a lovely artist called Joy Libano. She's an amazing artist, but there it is, and you can't take a photograph of it because you're in a secure area. So just go online, you'll find it. All right. But the next plaque, there's his again, look, he's able to write his own signature. All right, so again, it's these things. So he was a man of letters and a shopkeeper, but let's go. So if you go to Greenwich, up the hill, there's a plaque that very much denotes who he was in life. And as you can see, he's got his name there, an African man of letters, a composer. He wrote music, and if you go online, you can hear some of his music, minuets. And he was an opponent of slavery. And the story is that he was born on a slave ship, and he was encouraged to educate himself by the second Duke of Montagu. And eventually, it doesn't say that, I put the eventually in, and served as the butler at the Duchess, to the Duchess of here in Montagu House. So this is his story. And very much, this plaque actually was unveiled in 2007 by Nick Rainsford, who was the MP at the time. But it speaks of his achievements. But again, we want to know about his life. And much of his life, his beginnings were told to him. He didn't know. But the house that he may well have lived in is Dartmouth House. And this is the house of the first Earl of Dartmouth. And his surname is Led. And what the story of Ignatius is that he was born on a slave ship. Again, that's the story that's told by Joseph Jekyll in the book. And his mother died whilst giving birth to him. And the father, distressed at the prospect of going, where are they going? They're being captured and they're going somewhere. He decided that wife was gone, child, and he committed suicide. So the child was orphaned. But he was brought to England as a toddler, as a gift. And he was given to the three maiden sisters called the Leg sisters, and that's L-E-G-G-E. So the Earl of Dartmouth, possibly they lived here because it's a large house, they all shared it. But with their instructions and his poor treatment, he wasn't a happy child. And what he said was that in a letter to somebody that he wrote very often to, Lawrence Sterne, who wrote the book Tristram Shandy, he remembered, I was placed in a family who judged ignorance the best and only security for obedience. A little reading and writing I got by unwearied application, meaning he had to educate himself. He'd met the Duke of Montagu in passing, and the same was said to him, educate yourself. And he would occasionally visit the Montagus, and he found that they were very receptive to him and allowed him to write and read the books that were in the house. So when he'd had enough of the poor treatment that he was receiving from the sisters, he ran away. He ran away to them, and sadly the Duke had died by this time, 1749, but he pleaded with his wife to take him in, and she eventually did, and he became her butler. And when she died in 1751, she left him an annuity of £30, which was a considerable sum then. But as for a free man, he was able to determine his own path, so he was able to enjoy more of life and what it involved. And equally attempted to go on stage as Othello, but he didn't. He had an impediment. He had a stammer, so it didn't quite work out. But he was also, as I said, a composer of music. So this comment that I'm showing you here of God's image, though cut in ebony, goes back to the 17th century. It wasn't written for him, but it was quoted by Joseph Jekyll in saying, look at this man. You know, he's in God's image, but he's just happened to be a black man. All right, so he's just as good as ourselves. So it's important to recognize that, you know, these people weren't always sort of being prejudiced towards black people. They had to know them, and in some respects, they're knowing them through the fact that these people are serving them, and they're starting to get familiar with them in terms of understanding them, and even allowing them to have their own thoughts. So, you know, Joseph Jekyll, he was, you know, found him a man that, you know, very much he appreciated. But whilst he was working, Ignatius was working for the Montagus, he was able to, you know, meet very many people from a different social circle, and they equally were curious as to what he thought. And when he left after he was given the money, he came back to the Montagus, but it was a different Montagu he came back to. It was a George Brudenell, who became the first Duke of Montagu, the second creation, and he allowed him to work for him as a butler, and then moved him up to be a valet, i.e. the gentleman's gentleman, and he trusted him that much. I love that picture. Sorry, I'm trying to move it. So these are the places where Ignatius would have been working in terms of residence. He didn't necessarily live with the Montagues. He had his family, and they were able to stay there or live in other places. But Greenwich, the Privy Gardens, Whitehall, and just to say the location, the Ministry of Defence, that's where they had their house. Broughton House, North Hampshire. Richmond, there's letters where he said to people, come up the hill. Yes, and you'll see us on the right-hand side, bring your coach. Windsor Castle, guides who are here, the governors, the Round Tower, that's where he was staying. All right, he had his room there. And Bath as well, where he got his painting, had his portrait there. So, we move on. St. Margaret's Church. This is the family church, and this is where Ignatius got married. And I will show you, and Westminster Abbey is on the right-hand side, just for location there. But this is the plaque that was put in December 2023 that denotes that he was an abolitionist, a polymath, which means he knew a lot about various subjects, married Anne Osborne. Anne Osborne was a West Indian woman and black, and it's one of the rare moments of a black couple, but loved her very much. And they had 7 children. They had another one, but I'll tell you about in a minute. But married here, and they also, as I said, had their children baptized here, and also both had their funerals there as well. So this is the Ignatius family. Can you all see this? We have Ignatius, Anne, we have the children, Francis, Anne, highlighting some of them. Elizabeth, she was the one that lived longest, 1837. And she had the portrait, that portrait that you see of him, and she gave it was a prized possession. And in 1820, she gave the painting to one of Ignatius's friends, with thanks for his continued support. Because after Ignatius died, the money problems came in. Even though they had the book, there were still money issues, and the Stevenson family were very helpful in supporting them. And it went through the Stevenson's family, was sold in auction to a London art dealer, and then eventually, that's 1903, and eventually made its way over to Montreal, and then became the first historical painting to be purchased for the National Gallery in Canada. All right, so there you are, first historical painting. So we have William Leach, that's his son, Billy, who was working with Jekyll to compile the letters, because William didn't know much about his father other than these letters. So it was Joseph Jekyll that helped to compile it, and eventually they had a bookshop just off Leicester Fields, near to where we have the National Gallery today. But he died in 1810. I said that they had 7 children, and there's been a recent research that has discovered another child. And there she is, Mary Ann. All right, Mary Ann. So there's 8 children that they had in all. Yes, busy people. Anyway. So 8 children, living a life, enjoying very much working for the Montagues, but he's getting older and gouty as well, rich life, rich food. And so his master is thinking, what am I going to do? Because in the real world, if we let him go, how is he going to survive? And so he decided to help him become a shopkeeper. And next slide will show you that. It's a bit blurry. Try to get the definition. But Charles Street is where the shop is, and where you see the arrow. So if you go down to the Foreign Office, I'll show you another picture. That is where they eventually moved to. It wasn't far, because just across from Parliament Street, there was a street called Cannon Row or Copper Row. That's where they lived. But this is where they were. And when you look at this, you will see the Foreign Office, and you see a little arrow that I'm pointing to the wall, and you will then see this plaque. So it's not the blue plaque, but it is a Nubian Jack plaque, and it says their writer, symbol of humanity and of Africans, lived and had a grocery shop near the site. And so the reason why it's this colour, because it's a building that they couldn't just put it had to be in keeping with the stonework. And many of the people that worked there didn't know it was there. Just walked past it, went in the opposite direction. But when he got the chance to have this, he said, I verily think the happiest part of my life is to come. And he said that he would cut a respectable figure as a shopkeeper. And he had many people come into his shop. He'd be selling rum, He'll be selling the best Trinidad, that's cigars, not cigars and tobacco. But again, he was somebody that was also talking to people about how life was. And he was saying that, as a person, living amongst all these people, sometimes he felt like he was a lodger, only a lodger, and hardly that. So, again, he was sometimes feeling, the racism that was being, given to him, not by his friends, but by others who didn't know him. So we're going to move on, because I'm also mindful that I'm talking and time is flying as well. But that is Ignatius. His working, his history, he made history. He owned a shop, black owner owned a shop that afforded him an opportunity to vote. All right, so he was, we've got friends in high places, so I'm moving around the friends in high places, so he was very fortunate in that respect. He was the first black voter, but he voted twice, all right? But he wasn't the first black one because they've discovered another man who was there in Covent Garden in 1749. So second, but he's the only one that's voted twice. And he voted for Charles Fox, all right, who became the first foreign minister, and wasn't a good one at that, but never mind. But and again, he was the first black Briton to have an obituary. And so, this is a man that was very important. And again, this is the wording that was in a newspaper that said, I've lost it. Yes, about 6 yesterday morning died suddenly Mr. Ignatius Sancho, grocer and tea dealer of Charles Street, Westminster, a man whose generosity and benevolence were far beyond his humble station. He was honoured with friendship of the late Reverend Mr. Sterne and several of the literati of these times. So, to have an obituary, that in itself was historic. And that was in the Gazetteer and the New Daily Advertiser on the 15th of December 1780. There's more I could say, but I'm conscious of time. But yes, so this was Ignatius Sancho. If you go to the park, just up on Victoria Street, there's a little green space there. You'll see an information board, and you'll see again the image of Ignatius, along with Colonel Blood, Tower of London. But don't worry, this is the man you come to see. All right. So this is the book, £3,500. I was going to bid for it, and when it was an estimate of £300, and I forgot to bid. And then when I saw the final outcome, I said, thankfully I didn't do that. I didn't want to embarrass myself. So we're now on to Julius Soubise. Now I'm going to say to you now that out of all the four that I'm talking about, I liked him least. I just felt, I don't know if you know the celebrities, all these Only Way is Essex kind of people, they're out there and all trying to tell you that they're famous, and you're thinking, go away, This is him. I just couldn't warm to him, But what you're seeing here is a picture of him. This is supposed to be him. And he's fencing with a lady who's got a mask on. But if you notice, she's got an apron on, right, as well. And the words there, one of the most conspicuous fops of town. So again, but what you can't see, because they've hidden it, all right, is these words. The title says, the D of Q playing at foils with her favourite lapdog, Mungo, after expending £10,000 to make him A. And it's blank. So you've got to fill in the words. But the words that is coming out of his mouth here, the black man is saying, Mungo here, Mungo there, Mungo everywhere, above and below, ha, what your gracie think of me now? So I'm putting that in because that's how they would think of him speaking. And those are direct lines that comes from a Mungo character that's in the play, The Padlock. It was a very popular play. And if you know Ira Aldridge, he played the role of Mungo, and he had to black up for that when he got his opportunity. It was a very popular play, but he wanted to play that, and he enjoyed playing it because it was more than just being this man speaking in a funny tongue. But it's satirical, but it also is depicting two individuals, that is the Duchess of Queensberry and Julius Soubise. And in a way, he was given to her as a gift. And she set about getting him an education and etiquette so that he could be comfortable in the elite circles that she was going to introduce him to. and also she considered him like her son. So this satirical cartoon, in a way, tells you more about how they saw him and their relationship. You know, this man is taking her for a fool, because when she got him, she was in her 60s. So, you know, she was happy to have him and treat him and give him everything he wanted, and equally, like Andrew, turn a blind eye, yes, and not see what he was doing, and then eventually things start to happen. I'm trying to be topical as well. But this is the lady. This is a picture of her when she was young, and this is Catherine Douglas, the Duchess of Queensberry. And so she, when she was given him by her relative, that was Captain Douglas, as I said, she liked him and she wanted to take care of him. But she herself was an eccentric and outspoken woman. And she even got banned from George III's court. And she wrote him a letter saying, "Thank you very much for banning me," which means I now can be myself. I don't have to be stuck with the court, sort of with the court etiquette. But his name, Julius Soubise was originally, began life as William, the son of an enslaved African woman, and born around 1754 in St. Kitts. And he was bought by a Royal Navy Captain Stair Douglas, and he was brought to England at the age of 10. And he was given the name Othello, but they said that came from the staff working in the Queensberry household. But she renamed him as Julius Soubise, after a French Duke, Charles de Rohan. And she gave him a privileged life. And she spared no expense cultivating him, giving him elocution lessons, classical music, the art of gallantry, and trained him under, and he was trained under Domenico Angelo in his fencing school in Soho Square. And so he used to accompany Angelo, because now Angelo was the fencing instructor to the wealthy, and he would go to Eton and Windsor, and also was taught riding. So he became very proficient in those skills. But what we'll see of him is the dandy. And what we see here is that he was one of the first black men to be referred as a Mungo macaroni. And that means that the macaroni is around his fashion. He loved dressing up. This man dressed to the nines. Had his sword, his waistcoat, everything. He loved shoes with buckles, shiny buckles. And you know, you think that, is it Louis Vuitton? Yes? With the red soles? It's done before. He was wearing them. Yes? No, it's not a thing of today. That was the fashionable time. And he would be in various circles. And equally, he was a member of various fashionable clubs, one of them being the Thatched House Club, which was on St. James's Street. And he enjoyed socialising. He was in various places enjoying himself. And again, you know, this is where he falls foul, because as much as he's enjoying himself, there was one person that was seeing this young man is ready for a fall, and that was Ignatius Sancho. Ignatius Sancho, he was in communication with him, and he was telling him to, you know, be careful, and in a way to understand that the people that you're surrounding yourself with aren't necessarily going to be there to help you. And what he wanted to show him was that, you know, you have to know your history, understand it, and be better. But, you know, he didn't take that advice. He sometimes styled himself as the Black Prince, claiming African royalty, and he refined his manners, you know, to fit into high society. And again, people started to rumour about his relationship with the Duchess, thinking that there was more to just her giving him money and allowing, you know, to pay up his debts. And dandyism was, as I said, is this phrase that was bandied around. And I want to show you some examples of dandyism in the way that these are not of Julius Soubise. So here we are. All right, this is a famous Frenchman, all right, Saint-Georges, and he was a fencer. He came to London, by the way, and was introduced to the then Prince of Wales. But he also was brought by his father from the Caribbean and to be in the French society. But look at the clothes. So you're looking at Julius Soubise, typically would be wearing that and wigs. Yes, it's the time of wigs. Another gentleman here. This was put out on a blog to say this was Julius Soubise. It is not. It is a man called Christian van Hulub, who was born in Suriname and became a runner for Baron Nagel. So you know, when the police cars, when the Queen was coming or the King is coming, there's outriders going up ahead and stopping everybody. That's what he was doing. He was running ahead and saying, the Baron is coming, stop everybody. He goes through and they'll chase after the coach afterwards. But look how exotically he's been dressed. And this would have been the livery for Baron Nagel, so they would be able to identify who he belonged to. But this painting is in the tape, but not on display, just to let you know. So Ignatius was giving advice to his younger self in terms of Soubise and saying to be careful. Well, he didn't listen. And his wild behaviour ended up with him having to leave the country because he had been accused of raping a duchess's maidservant. He didn't go to Europe, he went to India. He sailed to Calcutta and he re-established himself there as a fencing master and an equestrian trainer. And whilst there, he met various people, and one of them is a man called Richard Bleckington, and I've got to read his diaries now because there's so much in there. But if I say to you, Bleckington would go around, he was working for the East India Company, and he was talking about him, and not in nice words. So think of Othello in Iago. Iago smiling to your face, but doing lots of things behind your back. That was Bleckington. And if people came to Bleckington and said, don't lend him any money, he's a liar, he's a thief. And he's run off with various debts. So his reputation was running ahead of him all the way there in India. He eventually got married to a young woman called Catherine Pawson, her daughter of an East India Company officer, and they had 2 children. But this is again another example of dandyism. Do you recognise one of the gentlemen here? Yes. Lewis Hamilton. I know, it is him. Yes. But he's wearing that sort of dandyism sort of suit, yes, larger than himself, but he's out there. And on the other side, again, a form of dandyism styles. Yes? The modern black dandyism. But yes, so he left, he fled. So these are the people that was there, Catherine Hyde, and Dominica Angelo Ignatius, even David Garrick, he knew him. And there's Richard Bleckington in red. Hated him, but you know, smiled to his face. This site there, what you see is the Tipu Sultan Shahi Mosque in Calcutta. What used to be there in the time of Soubise was his riding school. So it's there in Calcutta. What happened, he had a riding accident and fell and hit his head very badly and was taken to the hospital but died. He was buried in the military burial ground at Alipur, but that was redeveloped, and so his grave is no longer there. But the one thing, as I said at the beginning, I didn't like him much, and this was somebody else had written this, so I'm going to quote it. He certainly was a rogue, both with money, women and with money, but also someone whose remarkable achievements should not be forgotten. And so we're going to move on to this last person. But just to say, do look out for Julius Soubise and study him a little bit more, because that's what I'm going to do. Because he will take you on a journey, I'll tell you that. Right, so this lovely lady, we have no image for her, but more than likely one will come to light. We don't know where and when, but this in a way is just to illustrate her. Jane Harry-Thresher, Children of an Uncertain Fortune. I took that title from a book of the same, and written by David Livesey, and it was about mixed-raced Jamaicans in Britain and the Atlantic from between 1733 to 1833. And that book now is an amazing book to read, because I'm learning about more people who came here from the Caribbean and mixed-race families who were being inserted into what was the white families, or tried to be sort of given a chance to be in a social circle that they could never have been in the Caribbean. But I'm going to take you to the next slide. This is the house in which she was born. This is called the Hibbert House, as you can see in Kingston, Jamaica. And she was born to Charity Harry. And I'm using the phrase that was used at the time in the records of a mulatto free woman. And that's according to the baptism records. And she was the housekeeper of Thomas Hibbert. So this is the house now in 2020. So not much has changed, just the air conditioning. But this is the book in which Jane Harry's birth is recorded. And interesting enough, her cousin, i.e. another Hibbert, had a child with a black woman that is above her. But I'm going to point give you this one. This is Jane Harry, the daughter of Charity Harry, a free mulatto woman, by Thomas Hibbert, Esquire, was born December 8, 1755, and baptized October 26, 1757. So there is a record. And when I looked, I found her cousin just one up, again, of a free woman. So she was born to him. I'll just show you who he is. He on the left-hand side with the white wig, and that's his nephew on the side there. You can go to the Docklands and you'll see that portrait there. It's a facsimile of it. But these two men were very prolific in terms of owning plantations and slaves. They used to call them pens, and he had about 5 pens that way, and he had about 900 slaves enslaved. But he had the children, his 3 daughters with Charlotte, with Charity. So he decided that he wanted his daughters to come to England because he wanted to introduce them to a different life. And so when he sent them in 1770. But before they came, there was an Act of Parliament that was introduced in 1775. So they came when they were enslaved. But I'm going to tell you what happened. He had Charity. He didn't marry. She was his housekeeper. But the children, whilst he had them, were still regarded as enslaved. And it took an act in the House of Assembly, private act, to make Charity a free mulatto woman, even though she was recorded before then, and also any issue from her body, and that were the children. So they were enslaved and brought to England as enslaved. But when he went back to Jamaica, that's when the Act of Parliament, that meant they were free. All right, so 5 years after they arrived in England, he made them free. But he brought two daughters, he had 3 daughters, but 2 of them, Jane and Margaret, came to England to get an Anglican education. And they went to his former business partner's home, Nathan Sprigg, who lived in Barnes, and he would be their guardian. And what was expected was for them to assimilate into what is called polite English society. So Jane stayed with the family, but her sister went to boarding school. But sadly, the sister died just at the age of 10. And that was a deep blow, and that affected Jane in how she viewed, the Christian faith. And she started to question it. But she was there with the family. She just kept her thoughts to herself and continued with the socializing and trying to be accepted in the elite circle. The Spriggs introduced her to friends and acquaintances, even took her to Cheltenham, to the spa town. And you'll see there Joshua Reynolds, yes, slosher to his friends. But he taught her, she studied painting under him and won the gold medal for painting. So, it's recorded, but none of her paintings have survived. But when she was going around in these circles, she also met another lady, that is Mary Knowles. And Mary Knowles was a Quaker, and she had been struggling with the death of her sister and her faith. And Mary Knowles, in a way, found that route for her to be thinking about becoming a Quaker. So she'd written to her father that they were writing and keeping regular contact. And she reported to her father that the social circles that she was in, they treated her with great respect, and some of them with such affection. But she had she found solace with the friendship that she had with Mary Knowles, who was a devout Quaker and also knew Samuel Johnson. So, there was conversation with Samuel Johnson about Quakers and religion. But when Jane decided, because she'd met Samuel Johnson, and he found her, a nice young girl. But when she decided that she was going to be a Quaker, I'm quoting from Boswell now, that when she made her decision, it invoked the Caribbean. I compared him at this time to a warm West Indian climate, where heat sometimes produces thunder, lightning, and earthquakes in terrible degree. So that quote was from James Boswell about Dr. Johnson's response to the news. So he wasn't happy. And it's also recorded in the Boswell book that, he very was not happy at all. But even her father didn't approve of her religious change and then refused to financially support her. even after she wrote a 28-page letter explaining her reasons. And then she got thrown out of the Sprigg household. So what could she do? She went to Mary Knowles and they took her in and they found her work. The work was in Birmingham and it was with a family called the Lloyds. Lloyds of London? Not Lloyds, but it's not. It's Lloyds Bank. Yes? Because they were Quakers. And so she continued the relationship with their father, even though he had stopped helping her financially. And he died in 1780 in Jamaica. Now, his will became the contentious issue here, and I know some of us may have experienced that, but this, in a way, showed the realities of her relationship with people in the social circle and also with this other family. Because when he died, the nephew was his executor. This is another Thomas. And when they were expecting a certain amount of money, £1,000, they were asking for more. And this angered the nephew, who basically said that she was ungrateful and compared her to the daughters of best families in England. And that she was undeserving and did not have a place in the British Hibbert family. So adding further insult to injury, he insisted that her father did not think of her or Margaret as their parent. And this, again, is the reality that people found, when they were asking more of what they believed was their right, they found, great opposition. So, we move on, going to move past that. This, in a way, encapsulates what she was trying to do even after her father had disowned her. She saw with an opportunity with the will to help her mother free the slaves that she had been given, the enslaved. And she wanted to go to Jamaica. She married a Quaker, and he persuaded her to stay here. He didn't want her to go because he was concerned about, whether that she'd survive the journey or even what would happen to her when she was going to try and procure freedom for her mother's Negroes, as it's referred to. Because this is from the Gentleman's Magazine, and so I just transposed the information over there. But this is her obituary in the Gentleman's News. So it's just telling you that she was more than just a daughter that was going around in social circles. So she felt very passionately about the conditions that people were living in. She wasn't sort of immune to that, and it's very much a testimony to her sort of endeavours to try and free who she saw, as akin to herself. I'm now realising that I'm still black. I'm not part of that social circle. And this is the Worcester Friends Meeting House in Worcester where she would have gone. This is just a picture of it, but the design is still about the same. It's just been modernised inside. And this is the burial ground. And if you look, you'll see that there are no tombstones up. They're all horizontal. In a way, I saw this picture and I said, that's a lovely way to end, because in God's image we are, but we are of ebony, yes, cut in ebony. We're all the same. And I want for you to take away these people's story and recognise they did try their best to be part of a society that saw them as a curiosity or rejected them. But at the end of the day, the levelling field is very much the burial ground. We are all equal. So at that point, I say thank you. Thank you so much. There's so much more. I tell you honestly, I was going through, taking out bits and hoping that I was keeping the trajectory of my story well. But if there's any quick questions, because I know some of you want to go back to work, or you have other things to do.
This is a strong word.
No.
Question, Angela.
Angela, these four people, was there any evidence of aggression towards them, or was it just the novelty that they were trying? And you've been saying that novelties or curiosities or not.
So I've been asked about whether or not these people were treated with curiosity or aggression. In some respects, I think there's some evidence that people were smiling in their faces and talking behind them. And it's just when you see that satirical cartoon, you can see that there were some people that were not happy. This man is doing exactly, Soubise is doing exactly what other gentlemen were doing. They were spending money, hand out of a fist, but nobody was looking in their direction thinking they're above their station. It was part of the cause, but this is a black man who's now above, because they're in a world that they still would have people enslaved all around them, even in the household that they're working. Joshua Reynolds had, an enslaved person. Yeah, he's teaching this young person, who's mixed race. So I was thinking about how do they sort of separate their views of one group of people versus another that is being introduced to them to be part of their circle, but not quite. And it's, again, the bravery of being able to speak your mind plainly, is great, but doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get many doors opening. They might find them closed. But I take from this that there's more to discover, because the particular Soubise, Bleckenden was very, very critical, and was telling people, and it was the Othello Desdemona moment with Soubise, because Bleckenden told the father, is your daughter, yes? This man is low life, this man is an animal. And I'm thinking, Iago going to Desdemona's father and shouting out, saying, he's, it's just that they couldn't, they weren't going to kill him, but they were going to make sure they were going to destroy, get him out onto the streets. And I think that's, for Ignatius, I think he had a very lucky life, because as much as he saw difficulties, he knew he was in the best place. He commented that, one stopped him from reading because they wanted control, the other allowed him, and he said, I work for the best family. And they treated him as family, they trusted him. But that was one person. And yet, there's people being enslaved. So this very split screen kind of life, I don't know how they managed it, but they did.
Angela, that was great talk.
Thank you. Yeah.
You mentioned one of the Hibbert's daughters received a gold medal for...
That's Jane.
Was that for painting?
Painting, yeah.
And who awarded that?
That was the Royal Academy, yes. So, yes, the awards was the Royal Academy. So it's recorded, but again, they didn't keep any of her artwork, or I don't know where it went. But the interesting thing for me was Joshua Reynolds was teaching her. And again, you start to see these circles. They're not as big as you assume them to be, because David Garrick, Joshua Reynolds, Mary Knowles, and you can still come back to this house, yes, with those people, that social circle. And yet, Johnson, invited her in. He was happy to sit down and talk to her, but when she changed her mind, that's when all, he lost it. He lost the plot, And it's that danger, because if you lose friendships at these high places, you're lost. You're not anybody. Yes, it's not easy to sort of be in that circle and think that yes, I'm fine. Everything is fine, because there's still something that's going to put a lot of doubt in. Even if I use Saint George as the example, he equally lost his position because they put in laws to stop anybody of colour from raising up through the ranks. He'd been in the army, he'd been fighting and helping, Napoleon and various things. And the Lord came in, and all of a sudden he's not a person, persona non grata. So it's. I think they were treading very carefully indeed.
Can you just ask following on what you've said? So knowledge of how you expected to pave, how far you could push the line, was that made quite overt, or was it done? Was it quite nuanced, or was it done through gossip or something that would appear in press or laws, or did it all kind of depend?
From what I've seen, it's a mixture of all of those things, depending on which circle you're in. Because if you think about this is Jane, Harry. Her father, yes, had 3 daughters with this free woman, and because she decided she's not going to be a Christian faith, all of a sudden you're out. Yes, you're out. I'm not going to support you. And ironically, these people are hypocrites, because they're happy to bed the women, yes, but not necessarily give them their freedoms, or to allow them, or even to acknowledge, yes, they're ours. And even the nephew, when he told her, you're not even part of our family, guess what he was doing when he was in Jamaica? And in his will, he left some money, only £100 to those 3 girls and the women. But it's that hypocrisy that, what's good for the goose ain't necessarily so for the other. But all I've been doing has been like this, thinking, Who can they trust? Who will tolerate them? And even, Benjamin Franklin, he already has slaves, but he's looking at this one saying, so what makes her so special? And he was very nonchalant about it, very nonchalant. Yeah, I saw her, yeah. But it's like you have to be a performing seal, constantly showing you have education, you've read something or you're thinking about something. And I think I think sometimes there's a trend of that still today, in some places. I see this person and I've already set them up to say, no, they can't do these things. Think of us as women, yes? There's certain jobs you want to do, you can't be a fire person, yes? How are you going to lift that man over the try me, allow me, So there isn't that chance to prove yourself. And people in high places can ruin you, very easily. Yeah, so I find it's a navigation. I use the word dangerous because I thought it was dangerous because you could be a free person, and if you remember the film 12 Years of a Slave, that man was free, ended up in a pub, next thing you know, he's on the back of a lorry, a coat, or whatever, and he's now enslaved. So there's all of these different things that they had to deal with. And still walk amongst people who have been promised things by the Navy or the Army that you'll come here, get a pension, and find themselves on the street. So there's so many different things that were impacting on these people's lives.
Angela, you told us about people who seem to have, for one reason or other, by birth or by developing relationships, a certain amount of notoriety which has allowed them to rise above, to be visible historically.
Yes.
What do we know about people who led more ordinary lives or who were less connected than the four that you've isolated?
They're not celebrities.
Okay. Do we have any other information about
So how I'm working at the moment is these people are very much the people that have been found, and every time you look at Black history, they're mentioned. And then you have to move a little bit further away, and you start to see another name dropped in there of somebody that it could be a contemporary, but wasn't as out there, didn't necessarily have the supports. And that's a name. They're talking about other writers, other people. And I'm thinking, who are they? It's access to information, because sometimes they're there, but not necessarily being...
But is it the case that we'll simply never know? Because
we'll only
it's
discover
not
them.
documented.
Yeah, they're not all documented. You and I, today, we're not documented in the places that somebody said, oh my goodness, they were there at this time. We're just walking around doing our own thing. But if you're going to go out there and be a campaigner, or you're talking to somebody, and there's a photograph taken of you, and then somebody wants to know more about you, that's when the curiosity will raise you up. But for many of these people, they even look at Phyliss Wheatley, she disappears. It takes people in another generation or another century or three to discover that there was this person, either by chance or by its design, because there's something that was written down. We're finding people now in parish records. We're finding people that are in mental institutions. They went there, and they call it Negro or Black person or Jamaica. Then we're finding in different places, and then you start doing the sort of investigative work to find out more about them. And sometimes all you're going to have is that they lived there, died there. There's nothing in between. But not to say that they weren't important, it's just that nobody documented what they did, how they did it, and why they did it. But these are just four. And if I say to you, out of the book, the one of the children of uncertain and a certain future, I found 5 people that could be of interest again in terms of how they navigated, because we've discovered that there are people who were mixed race who became a captain in the Navy, but we didn't know about them because they were not kept here. They were left in Africa or the Caribbean, so we don't get to know who they are, but they're mentioned. So everything is a case of a discovery. Every time I come out, this is why this is so thick. And I've still got the rest of the work at home. But I can't give everything, but I can give a flavour. And I hope that you've had a flavour of what it is to discover people, they're interested. As I said, I love Phyliss, Ignatius, not so much Soubise, because I said, I could see him strutting around here and I'm thinking, really, and spending his mother's money, £10,000. But then again, as I said, if you think, and I'm using it topical, but think of Andrew, thinks he's the bee's knees. And there was nobody to tell him he wasn't. You see? And it took that downfall for all of a sudden to everybody to step back now and let him implode. Rather than they should have spoken to him earlier on. And that's where I see Soubise. They don't. But that's what I'm saying about Soubise. There was Ignatius, an elder, to him saying, look, I can see the path you're on. Yes, you need to know thine history, know it. Because you were born a slave, you were enslaved. You've been given an opportunity, don't squander it. And what does he do? He squanders it because he's got money. I've got women, I can enjoy them, they love me. And before you know it, somebody makes a complaint and his mother, i.e. the Duchess, cannot save him. Cannot save him. And he had to flee. He couldn't go to Europe. He had to go to Calcutta because people he knew in the circle were working out with the East India Company. And they took him on, but they didn't because it's a different thing. And interesting enough, he experienced racism there that he hadn't experienced in London. So he started to realise that, too late. But I've enjoyed learning about these people, and I hope you've sort of discovered a little bit of London, and there's so much more.